Hello, everyone. It's Kate Stillman with the Thrive with Kate podcast, and I'm here with Nicole Connor, who has a Substack account, and somehow I ended up on your list. And you sent out an article recently, I think it was in mid-May, that says you're not burnt out, you're collapse aware, the hidden cost of seeing the system and still being in it. So in Club Thrive and in Wellness Pro Academy, both of which communities I run, there's a lot of language, I would say, about paradigm and matrix and seeing the system and yet not being in the system, but still being in the system. Like still like that there's this larger there's this larger paradigm or matrix or even economy that we're both in, but we're also in many ways able to see from the outside, and maybe even able to, in some ways, to like live outside that or live like a parallel life. So I would just love for you, this whole idea of collapse aware and burnout and what's happening, because so many people feel like there is not enough time to have the kind of experience that they want to be having and living their life. And yet we have it all, right? Like we have running water, we have heat. Most of us have more clothes than we can wear, right? We have a way to get from here to there in a way that humans even 100 years ago would have just been like, wow, that you guys are living in nirvana. Like, why are you so burnt out? And I'd say, like, particularly, why do younger generations feel increasingly burnt out, and what is happening with that and collapse aware? So welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here, and I really look forward to pushing people to the the resiliency code Substack. So I'm just going to spell that out for people who are trying to find you, and then we'll dive deep into the conversation. So the resiliencycode.substack.com. Okay, so what is going on with burnout and collapse aware?
Oh my goodness. So I think the best place to start with this would be my own experience with burnout and really how my understanding of burnout evolved from there. So I had spent quite a few years in the corporate world, and eventually my body literally stopped functioning. At that time, I was working in international finance, and I was working in the offshore markets. And at that time, I'm servicing clients that are like the wealthiest of the wealthy. I had 3 clients at that time who had just shy of $1 trillion combined in assets globally. That's a ridiculous amount.
And how old were you?
At that time, I was 33.
And what were your responsibilities, just to give people the full picture?
Sure. So at that time, I brought a new product line to market, and what we were offering was global entity management. So what could happen was a private equity firm, a large private equity firm, would come to us and say, we want a single point of contact to form, dissolve, merge, do any of our corporate maintenance on our entities, make sure we're in jurisdictional compliance, that we're paying our taxes, that we're in good standing. So I was that central point of contact because I was brought onto the original team in order to set that up. So on any given day, I had at minimum 450 emails hitting my inbox, and we had a service contract that required a 2-hour response time. And so I had quite a small team, but I was also managing teams in multiple jurisdictions. So we were operating in 17 different countries, just my company. And then plus we had third-party service providers. So when you include countries like the US or Canada or Australia or China, where you have multiple jurisdictions in a jurisdiction, it gets very overwhelming. But what I started to learn during that time was that it doesn't matter what country you're in, business functions like business. And what started to reveal itself to me was the idea of kind of capacity, jurisdiction, and contracts, which is really important to the work that I do. And I'll get to that later. But what I was also seeing during that time was there's a very clear operating system at a global level, and it is not for the benefit of humanity. It is not for the benefit of Earth. And it doesn't matter what kind of lipstick or makeup people are going to put on a lot of the B Corps and the nonprofits, because they all funneled to these organizations. When I say these companies were large, like one of my clients had 25,000 companies around the world. And you start to see a really clear through line. And one of the products that we had was this digital minute book. So all of the information for these entities was going into this digital minute book. And at any time I could hit a button and see a full structure chart and see exactly how everything was structured from the top down. So if that's not a window into the world and how everything operates, like I don't know what is. And before my logical brain could catch up with it, because I had a massive chip on my shoulder, self-worth issues, performance-based, and I didn't take the traditional route for education. So I was on paper vastly underqualified for the job that I had, but by nature, I'm a systems worker. Like I am a systems mind like systems minded. So I see how everything webs just very naturally. And so fighting those internal battles while also experiencing the external pressure. I was working 80 to 100 hours a week and dying on the inside, and my body was collapsing. I literally stopped being able to walk at one point because I had such severe back pain. And because I'd been very traumatized in the allopathic medical system, when I finally hit full burnout, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I wasn't going to a traditional doctor and I was going to have to figure it out. And that's when a lot of somatic work came into my life, bioenergetic, etc. So I'm intimately familiar with burnout in the traditional sense. And what I started finding as I moved through my own holistic process was that I was also starting to hit limitations and walls in those spaces as well, where I was starting to feel like my healing journey was stalling or looping, or I could only go so far with it in the containers I was in. And then I couldn't go past it in that space. So I was hitting, I don't really know how to explain it, but usually inside of, pardon me?
I said I might.
Yeah, go for it. What would you?
Well, if we can look at evolutionary journees as like we can look at a growth path and a depth path. Just like we can hit a glass ceiling in growth, we can hit a floor where it's like a immovable, can't get through in depth, which is almost like tunneling, like it can't get through to the next level of depth, which will fuel the growth. And that's right. It's mythological, right? So those references, like we can go, yeah.
Right. And that ties in really well with the evolution that I've found myself on. So I was just trying every modality. And then again, I'm still finding these through lines, systems brain. I'm finding these through lines across all the modalities. And I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. This was 2017, that happened. Over the last 7-8 years, I've really synthesized a lot of different kind of modalities, mythologies, and really looking for what's happening. And then I met my kind of co-pilot and co-creator of the Resiliency Code, David, and we were having a conversation one day, and we were talking about the idea of collapse and that systems are inherently designed to collapse. They're not actually designed to expand. And even what we believe sometimes is helpful and healing is still caught inside of this bubble that we can't seem to break out of. And we're like, what is that bubble? And I was trying to get to what the origin and the root was. And I've always said that, the world that we have was narrated into existence. So we need to change the plot. We need a new story. And I was looking at him one day and I was like, oh my God, David, in the beginning, there was the word. And that's like a very famous and very well-known scripture quote, John 1:1. And I said, there's two.
And it parallels other traditions. So we have it in the Vedics. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And I said, there's two. And I always work in assumption and presumption. So just because we assume something to be what it is, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what it is. It's just our assumption based on our perspective. And I was like, there's two major assumptions there. He's like, what's that? I said, well, what's the beginning and what's the word? What are those assumptions? And it led me into really looking at the hero's journey, because Joseph Campbell, quite well, like he articulated the hero's journey and its narrative path through basically all of human evolution. And I'm like, well, if you're telling a story that requires that you have a victim, a villain, and a hero in order to perfect your plot, that's a completely externalized way of looking at the world. And up until that point, when I met David, I was working inside of my own systems of what I call HALT and CJC. And HALT stands for honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust, starting with self first, and CJC, which is capacity, jurisdiction, and contracts. So who are you? Where are you standing? And what are all of the contracts that are binding you to that place? And in order to know that, you have to be able to get really, really brutally honest with yourself about who you are and what you're participating in. So when we had this conversation, it was like this massive aha moment where it's like, oh my gosh, this hero's journey mythology that we've been in is fundamentally flawed because it constantly keeps you in this state of externality. And what happens when you turn everything all the way inward? And then this is where the idea of our collapse logic came from, where inside of the hero's journey, because it is a cyclical looping story, it's naturally always going to keep collapsing on itself. And if you want to be able to break out of it, it's going to require intense, radical personal responsibility and accountability that starts with how honest you can be with yourself, how much you can accept what you've faced, what you've endured, who you are. Can you do that unwavering? Can you cultivate the amount of self-loyalty that is required for you to cultivate self-trust? Because you cannot trust anything outside of yourself more than you trust yourself. And if we don't have that kind of trust, we're always going to have flawed contracts, both with ourselves and with other people. So yeah.
See, it's interesting because our work is so parallel. Like I've been writing and teaching on this for a decade on the depth path, on the heroine's journey of the depth path, of the path that happens in the dark, right? Whereas the hero's path happens in the light and the heroine's path happens in the dark, mythologically, right? The heroine gets sucked into hell, goes down, 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 where it's obscured. So when we can't see, right, because we can't see on the depth path, it's all integrity based. So that requires the integration and these pieces that you're naming, right? It's like the self has to become integrated in a way it hasn't been integrated before, right? And that's where we can hit those walls under, in the movements towards hell, right? So hell is what we're often trying to avoid, but this is like the obstacle is the way. The only no tree can grow to heaven whose roots don't grow to hell, right? To quote Carl Jung, we have to go inward and downward, and it's by nature disorienting. It's by nature obscured. There's not visibility. The senses that we have used on our hero's path are no longer very useful to us and might actually bring us the wrong way. That which culture wants for us and from us will often go against our own integrity, our own, right? That which will actually bring us into the next constellation of ourself. It's interesting to see that we're using very different language. We've never met before, and yet we're talking about the same thing.
Because we've experienced very similar things. Like you keep running up against the same walls, and then eventually it's like, I don't think I'm the problem. Like, I think there's actually something bigger here. And that's what I was finding in the healing spaces that I had been encountering. Like the language is beautiful and it felt very empowering until it didn't, until it's like, but there's not actually something or someone outside of me that's doing this. Like, I remember having this really profound moment, and I can remember it so clearly, where I had heard, like, Nicole, you're the only common denominator of your problems. Like, you are the only one that is consistently participating in every single thing that seems to be a problem in your life. Like, oh, it's me. Oh, it's me. And everything that's showing up in front of me is revealing those other things to me. Now, it's not saying that I'm going to take bad behavior or, tolerate things outside of myself that create a lot of dissonance and discord. That's what discernment is for. But it's like, well, if there's not a villain that I'm pointing at, if there's not a they or a them that's inflicting something on me, then that's just my perception that I'm choosing to take in to avoid the responsibility of dealing with myself. And that was just a very pivotal shift in my being. It became this really interesting project and kind of self-study, because the moment I started to embody that, everything in my life changed, from the way I felt, the way my body moved, the way I looked, like everything. Nothing stayed the same. And what I love about this kind of work and the embodiment of it is it's self-evident. Like, as you start moving through this and the deeper you move into this radical reclamation of honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust, which on the flip side is really getting clear about all of the ways that you're dishonest or in denial or self-betraying or actively upholding external deceptions, it becomes inevitable and undeniable that you are functioning different than, I would say, 99% of people.
Yeah. There's something that you said earlier I just want to dive into, which is systems inherently collapse. And I find that the word entropy is better understood than enthalpy. So if we look at like that, I think that is true, but I think the paradox is that the opposite is also true, that systems are also designed to evolve. So if we look at if we just look at humans and the way that biologically, like our DNA, if our DNA is preserved into the next generation, right? That's enthalpy. That's an upcycling of the wisdom of the past into the future. But my sense is that a lot of the way that modern systems are designed, which are not designed from this biological intelligence, but seem to be counter to that. Like if we're over harvesting, right? If we're just not taking in like Chief Seattle 7 generations into the system, and we're just looking at a system from how can I make life better for myself and my people in the next 10 years? That's where we have that movement towards entropy rather than this upcycling of enthalpy.
Absolutely. Because we're just not in a state of stewardship right now. You know, people aren't thinking that far ahead.
Well, our systems aren't like our systems. And I think that's what you're pointing to is like if our systems are moving towards entropy, the system that we're operating in, then that'll affect us as individuals.
Yeah. Well, this is where the epigenetics and the environment get really interesting because it's like what came first. We have epigenetically been primed to accept the systems that we're in, and it reinforces I think the devolving system at the same time.
Both, right? Because even if we look at biology and like viruses evolve much faster than bacteria, and those both evolve much faster than human DNA cells. So we're always in a rapidly changing environment. So how our ancestors survived and how all life on Earth survived was this quick adaptability and resilience to enthalpy, to upcycling the genetic code, whether it's a viral code, a bacterial code, a human DNA code. And so as long as we take a longer time perspective, we can tune into enthalpic systems as opposed to entropic systems.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to break that down because when you said that, I'm like, I'm going to get caught up on that. And I know certain listeners are going to get caught up on like, no, not all systems are in destruction. Like our whole DNA is like reliant on enthalpy.
Yes. So when I say not all of so systems, I should say man-made curated systems, like the environmental systems, societal systems, cultural systems.
And it's all caught up in like our current economy and our current global financial structure. Like we're saying in that, yes. And I wrote my college thesis on that. So I'm 100% behind you.
Yes.
On full cost accounting.
Absolutely. But the human system is designed to not collapse. The human system is designed to be resilient. But when you
and the planetary, right?
The planetary system. Yeah. But when you have these competing cycles between the environment that you're in and being conditioned in both epigenetically, biologically, and environmentally versus what we are actually biologically and inherently created.
Yeah.
That's kind of the distortion that I'm attempting to break through in this collapse awareness, which is we have to be able to understand and see why the systems outside of us have been designed and when I say designed, it sounds like people are intentionally doing it. But again, as I said, there's like these epigenetic factors where you're living what you learn. And there's like this self-reinforcing factor. I don't believe that there's like a single nefarious character.
Well, I love the work of like, again, some of this like deep time perspective on this is like, when did this start? Like, when did humans start to not care about their offspring? So we see this in modern culture, right? I was talking to my dad the other day about this, where it's like, I don't actually believe the people with wealth care about future generations, because if they did, we wouldn't have 30% of our children on pharmaceuticals in the United States, heading towards a 50% obesity rate in children by, 2030, 2035. Like that does not show care of the offspring. And even if you can protect your little bubble, like good luck with that. When you put yourself in a pool of dirty water, right? These things happen. So I like Terence McKenna's perspective on this, and more of like a deep time of like, when did we make the shift? And it was, in his opinion, like post-agriculture. And it was when, so if we want to have power over a people, we have to take primal habits out, right? So we have to get them into conditioned habits. Yeah. And so the easiest way to dumb down the system is basically like these bread and circuses. Like instead of eating meat, like having primal awareness to hunt and gather, we store grain, and then we ferment grain into alcohol, and we make alcohol and sugar, right? Whether it's carbs, we make that the primary substance. So, and to have an altered state of consciousness, whenever a culture only has alcohol legal, as opposed to the entheogens, the plant medicines that restore the enthalpic drive, right? We just have entropy. And then we have systems based on entropy. And then we have people in power only competing over these entropic systems, which is like, how can I hoard more for my I, me, my right now, rather than tap into what am I doing and how does that tap into the larger whole that I'm driving?
Yeah. And a lot of that requires our unconscious participation.
Yeah.
Right? We are participating in it because I think structurally we don't understand what we're looking at, which is why my time in legal and finance world, really repeatedly hearing capacity, jurisdiction, and contracts.
Yeah.
I had to step back and really think about that from like the micro to the macro level of what that actually means, because your capacity at its purest state, I look at capacity as akin to what we would call unconditional love. It is your ability to give and receive without condition. That is a really hard thing to get to. Like, I don't know that anyone can get there completely because there is so much conditioning there, but your capacity is what you can hold.
Definition of mothering too, though. It's in the archetype of the mother, right? So we do have that reference.
Yeah, yes. And again, this is where it gets tricky for me, because when I look at the mother too, and you may find this in your work, there's a very difference between the role and the title that we've given to mother and the actual function of mother.
Well, and the experience of mother, right? Where a mother in her instinct, again, we'll go back to enthalpy, instinct, protecting the genetic code, is you're a milk machine for the first year, right? So your physiology has now been available for 2 years, right? So one in utero, and then the next in this postpartum, where your desire is even your awareness. So in a natural birth, there's an awareness that this life is more important than your own. But that's been disrupted, like to your point, right? Greed systems have disrupted this enthalpic code. So now we have postpartum depression. We have, all these interventions on attachment parenting, vaccinations, massive vaccinations starting in the first 10 minutes of the baby's life, all of which are driven by a profit motive, not by science and all that.
Which has fundamentally disrupted the function of mother, which is to provide structure and nurture. And we look at the world, and it's one thing to say down with the patriarchy. It's like, but men are born of women. So structurally, there's an issue. There's incoherence in the system, in the body, and structurally we are out of integrity. And so how do we get back to that? What does that look like? And so it's like, what are you holding that's not yours? What are you agreeing to that's not yours? Where are you standing where you have no business standing? And what agreements are keeping you in those places?
Yeah. And what's the trauma that underlied that, right? Like, even if you look at the circumcision with Jewish boys, it's like, how do you endanger the infant so the mother can't protect them? So these are so deep. Vaccinations are the same thing. The baby is born, you take the power away from the mother, you put an injection into the baby. That's one of the first experiences we have that creates that disconnect between sons respecting the mother, sons elevating the mother. And so when we have this much disruption, this entropic disruption in the enthalpic code, right, that we're not able to upcycle the wisdom of the species.
Oh my gosh, I had a beautiful conversation on that very topic with Dr. Nathan Riley. He's a holistic OBGYN and he was holistic OBGYN and palliative care doctor. And he exited the allopathic system to work holistically and work with doulas, midwives, etc. And we went deep on that particular conversation because it's so important. Like, how you were birthed into being is so incredibly important. And that, like, to your point, the trauma that we experience, moments coming out of the womb, and even before then, even at conception, from conception to birth and onward. And that's not even getting into the epigenetics of the mother, but it's a much bigger conversation, but it's so important. And it's part of the origin trauma that we do have to work through to be able to get clear on these so again, what are you participating in? What contracts do you believe that you need to fulfill? And how does that govern how you participate in the world? Because the moment you can see the contracts and you can understand how your participation is being massaged, molded, influenced, you then get to change that. And that's the shift from the external to the internal.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to what resolves this whole collapse awareness.
It's moving internally. So David and I, when we came together and birthed what we call the resiliency code, we were kind of looking at really, what is resilience? What is true resilience? And we're both systems thinkers, systems workers. He spent a lot of time in tech. I've been in the fintech world, and we've been building globally centralized systems for corporations for decades between the two of us. And we're like, well, what does that actually look like in the human, right? And it's like centralization has happened in the corporate world globally at the same rate that humans have been fracturing. There's an interesting call right now for decentralization. Everybody wants everything decentralized. And it's like, if you can't hold the complexity of what has been centralized, decentralization is going to feel the same as centralization. It's going to be just as chaotic. You're going to feel just as out of control. Resilience sits in the middle. So we found that resilience, like everything we work in the world, and again, for me, it's part of the hero's journey in this binary thinking, is we're either in collapse or chaos, or we're in health or we're in sickness, or we're always on these extremes, but resilience is truly in the middle. And it's not to be confused with endurance. It's not how much can you adapt and bend and contort yourself. It's like, how can you stand in your wholeness and your knowingness? And what tools do you need to be able to do that? So then you get to choose if you're going to move towards a more centralized space or a decentralized space. You need to be able to have the choice to do that, but you can only do it when you know what you're looking at. So when we were developing the resiliency code, we were like, this needs to be as like Fisher Price as like stop, drop, and roll if you're going to have a fire. And we came down with pause, prepare, and participate, which is when you encounter a system, you need to pause. And that is your initial cue that I need to go inward with this. And that starts with self-honesty. If you can't be radically honest about who you are, who you're being, what you're seeing in front of you, you can't move past go. Because if you do, whatever you do is going to be distorted. It's going to be incoherent. You're going to have a problem. And then, so while you're moving through kind of honesty, acceptance, loyalty, trust, really kind of getting your inner clarity and working on that inner fidelity. Well, now, if you want to start participating differently in the world, you got to get prepared for that. You can't just go from like, I've done the inner work to I'm going to move in the world differently. Well, what are you actually moving through? Like, you have to understand, again, your capacity in that situation, where you're standing, and the agreements that are binding you to those places. And that happens again from the internal to the external. And then participate. That's how you now start moving through the world with a different lens and a different level of self-accountability and self-responsibility that ensures that no matter what's being thrown at you, you know if something feels off, if your gut doesn't feel good, if you're having an issue with something in your field and you can't put words to it, that's your cue to pause. You have to take a beat, you have to stop. And that's really hard in a culture, in a society where we're moving through instant gratification and everything needs to be convenient and fast and accessible and move. So a big part of what we're doing is really trying to move people through that process of pause, prepare, and participate. And we've baked that inside of the resiliency code. And a big part about the resiliency code is rooted in the laws of neutrality at the physical, emotional, spiritual, legal, and geopolitical levels, because neutrality is something that we don't really understand to the depths that we probably should. And again, that was something that I learned quite a bit of working in the legal and finance sector. And then again, through the pandemic and learning how to stand differently when the world is railing against you. And when you're moving in opposition to the world, it gets very crunchy. People get very crunchy with you. And neutrality became my superpower. And it actually became like a cloak of invisibility, because when you can learn to decharge and become incredibly neutral, the world must respond to you that way. Because even geopolitically, a country that declares neutrality cannot engage in conflict, nor can they be pulled into conflict. It must be respected. And it became a really important principle for us to ensure when we were building out the resiliency code that was like one of the core anchors of what we were doing.
It reminds me of like a lot of what you're saying of how the terms that you're using are very much rooted in these deep thought wisdom systems. We have this ground of being, and then this impulse to evolve. So that impulse to evolve goes into that prepare and participate, whereas the ground of being, that's the pause, right? So this is like very common spiritual language that's cross-cultural, right? So we have this ground of being that is where that depth path right? Where the truth of the depth path and the integrity is found. It's not found in the growth path. It's not found out in the world. It's found in the quiet moment, right? That's behind every moment, where we tap into that. And then this impulse to evolve arises out of that. With neutrality in the Yoga Sutras, the word for that is when you set a goal, right? You have a goal, and that goal might be enlightenment. In the path of yoga, the goal, it's a specific goal, is enlightenment. So that's complete understanding, interconnectivity, and full awakening of all of the levels of physiology, not just the physical physiology, but the subtle physiologies. So if that's the goal, then in practice to the goal, so that taking action, that continuous pause participation cycle, right? Yeah. Where we're in that very, very often daily cycles with the effort, with the hard work that is done in the short term, the adversity habit. That's not the instant pleasure. It's not the instant gratification, where there's that like, okay, there's a chunk of work that gets to the goal, and that chunk of work is highly repetitive, right? And there has to be iteration and improvement that's built into that word abhyasa, which is just again and again and again and again and again. If it's a big enough goal, there needs to be concerted action and awareness that's enthalpic. Again, that's like upcycling the intelligence of what did I learn yesterday so I can do the practice better today, so I can participate better today. And then that is paired with vairagyam, which is your word for neutrality. And that vairagyam is without, so raga is where you're attached, you're not neutral. You have a very, and you're pulled into the conflict, usually is the raga, right? And vairagya is vaya, saying not that. So not pulled into that. And that's that neutrality.
It is the and the neutrality piece is like, when you're getting pulled, right? And sometimes you'll do and say and try and rationalize all of the reasons why you're not. But we know when we're holding a charge, right? And we're always holding a charge of some sort. Nothing is, I don't think, inherently 100% neutral, because we are human and we have emotions and we have an environment that's constantly going to sway us. We're always kind of in this center space where we're going back and forth. But when you're getting pulled, to your point, when you start to get that pull, that is your instant tell that it's like, it is time to pause. It is time to halt. You need to take a minute before you choose to participate, because we've all done it where our emotions have run the show and we've participated in something, whether it be a conversation or a job, and whatever. We've participated in something where we're like, if I had only just taken a breath, I wouldn't have done that, and there wouldn't have been this ripple effect. And we need that more than ever right now with what's happening around us. And what I've also learned, and as I'm sure you've experienced, is when you can really start to embody this, you also become a tuning fork, and it naturally starts to extend around you. When your nervous system can stay regulated and can stay coherent and can stay grounded in yourself, where you're not searching outside of you for everything, it becomes incredibly magnetic and electrifying for the people that are around you, and you begin to shape the field around you, which gets really, really interesting, and it's super cool, and it's something I love to play with.
Yeah. That shows up in a few ways in archetypes. It's like it shows up in the elder and it shows up in the guru. So guru can be of any age, right? Whereas the elder can't, where the word guru literally is heavy with light.
Yeah.
So they have a density because they're in the grounded being. They're not like, reactive, kind of the opposite, I think, of a lot of politicians these days, right? In that field, and they're creating that field that extends far beyond themselves. So then it's that access point, right? And it's vibrational. So that creates, like you're saying, the tuning fork, that resonance. Yeah. And then to me, that elder piece was part of it that we're just so missing because of, to your point, that so many systems are in entropy, like so many systems are going towards collapse. And so we don't have this continuity of the 7 generations of like looking forward, 7 generations, looking back, 7 generations in our decision making.
Oh my goodness.
So the elders don't get to be grounded in what's best for the species. And if we look at, let's talk about wealth for a minute. So right now, 50% of global assets are held in boomers in the silent generation, right? And so this is keeping people who are in millennials and Gen Y from basically participating in the economy. And I love Amy Poehler's recent, she did a recent bit on, on like how the different generations orient to money. And like the younger generations are like, what is money? Because no longer, when the major resource is not accessible, then what is the adaptation, right? And so what I see, having a 17-year-old, it's really interesting to watch. Like they value what I see with her and her friends, and they are definitely in more of like an elite, enlightened, group, just by nature of their parents and where they were born and the advantages that they've had and all that. So in many ways, I would say when you have groups like that have more access to consciousness early on, to higher levels of consciousness early on, and a physical environment, an emotional environment that supports that, it's interesting to watch that as a test group, because they're going to be ahead of the curve. So they're going to be the group that's pulling ahead of the curve. So how do they relate to money? They value, it's so interesting to see this right now. Materialism is free because the world's hyper material, right? So you can go into a thrift store and get all your needs met. If you don't need to own things as much as to be able to use them. So what they value more than money is time. And that didn't used to be the case. So like the boomers, they were obsessed with materialism, right? And so they traded their time. They created a system and they reinforced a system where they have to hold on to their assets because they work so hard for them. And so their whole orientation to what is wealth, right, and their absorption of real estate, their absorption of capital is such that it keeps the younger generations from accessing that. So then the younger generations will naturally generate a system that works outside of those assets.
Well, yeah. And so part of our pause, prepare, participate. So pause for us is the halt, prepare is the CJC, and then participate is what we're calling sovereign wealth, which is WELLTH. And that's where we're hitting like the 9 dimensions of life. So your physical, your emotional, your intellectual, your creative, your social, your vocation, your spirituality, all of these areas. And it's a value, what we're calling a value recognition model, because to your point, have to begin to value what we have to be able to recognize, revisit, and view our value models and our wealth models. One of the reasons why we're doing sovereign wealth and really taking almost a CEO style approach to it is any CEO talking about the wealth gap in these large corporations, I had a front row to it. Built the platforms so that at any moment they can hit a button and they can see what they're holding. They know their capacity at all times. They know which jurisdictions they're operating in, and they understand the contracts that are there. We can't do that easily. There's not many people that can zoom out and take a high level look at their life and know exactly what fits in what bucket. And when you don't know what fits in what bucket, you tend to outsource your power to other people. And then you start to lose the inherent value of that. And especially around resourcing and what we consider to be a resource, because your relationships are a resource. Your health is a resource. All of these things are resources. And if you can't zoom out and look at your quote sovereign wealth, what makes you inherently wealthy and what actually sits in those buckets, you actually become under-resourced. You don't know what you're holding, devaluing it, and then you're seeking externally what you can actually already fulfill for yourself. So we created this interesting kind of concept, and we have like a sovereign wealth wheel where you can go in and kind of do just like a quick questionnaire, and it plots out your wheel. So what you think you're holding in all of those dimensions, and you can see how bumpy it is, how circular it is, how wide, how narrow. And then we have a tool that we've built that functions very much like this CEO style dashboard, where you can start plugging in what it is that you have in your life and start to reorient the value in your life and start to really see, I'm trading my time for money here, and it's actually impacting this area of my life. And then these are the imbalances that I'm now experiencing, whether it's fatigue, poor sleep, damaged relationships, whatever. So it's become this really interesting process for us to be able to move through that. And I'm constantly looking at, I don't have children, but I'm constantly looking at this younger generation because they get it. They are the new value recognition model. They are changing how we create and exchange value. And it's so important right now. And it is what's going to bust these financial legacy systems, because they're already inherently broken. In a traditional wealth model right now, you're 3 and out. If someone made their wealth in by the 3rd generation, it's gone. That is like the traditional path right now. So that standard legacy model is fundamentally flawed. So we have to begin to recognize and change how we how we exchange value.
Yeah, it's like I love Robert Breedlove's What Is Money show, where it's like he talks a lot about, well, his favorite book is Robert Percy's book, Leela. And Percy also wrote a much more famous book, The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And the obsession with that book is the question of what is value, right? So if we have store of wealth, to your point, is like, does the store of wealth survive generationally? And the answer to that is no, right? In a lot of forms. Maybe with Bitcoin, that might be changing, but this is an experiment. So the data is, like there's hope in that, where you have an anti-inflationary currency. Whereas anyone else who's storing, you're taking geopolitical bets on real estate, right? And then if we look at the true stewardship of wealth is going to be the human in charge of the stewardship. And so if that is going to the next family member, then how are the actual values transferred? So if it's a value of greed, the problem with greed is it goes to enthalpy, right? It has a short-lived cycle. But if you're in business and you're greedy with your business partners, eventually people won't do business with you. If you're fair, right? If you can trade over time, if you can trade over the long game, right? So we want to be able to have store of value where we can trade over the long game. Then how do we pass that value, that family value? This is actually one of, I think, the lessons that we've been teaching the longest in Club Thrive is like, what can you name your values? Can your children name the values in your unique family code? Because we all have language, like in your resiliency code, you've developed a lot of language and systems. In my Club Thrive, we have a lot of language and systems, right? Where we develop, and this is the first, there was the word, we codify concepts, right? In order to have this transference, not just spread, which might be what's happening now, but depth. And depth is what happens over time. So when we're on a depth journey, we're like, what is bringing us into integrity with where we store value over time? Now, if we can do that, right, if we can do that with some grace, then there's a connection between the younger generations and the older generations. They're sharing it on the thread is value.
Right. Well, I grew up with my grandmother in my home for as long, like from the day I was born until she passed when I was 16. I didn't know a day without her. We had an intergenerational home. She had an intergenerational home. David and I talked to people in like family offices. We're kind of fascinated bringing our work into a family office because what we're doing is just influencing legacy structures to move just away from how they're transacting just with their money and going, what does this actually look like generationally? Like, I can't tell you how many boomers have businesses right now that they can't give away. Children want nothing to do with it because they were traumatized inside the family system with what that business did to their formative years. And it's so,
or it's just not their dharma, right? Or like that whole phase is just expiring.
It's not there. And I said to David, it said, we've watched kind of like the quote destruction of the nuclear family, where we've watched families get broken apart. We've seen these trauma cycles and healing. Like there's a lot of work on inner child and looking at that right now because there's so much work to do that's been passed down generationally, geopolitically and economically. We're in a position now where, as you said, the boomers are holding the assets, and then you have their children who are struggling, and we're about to watch intergenerational families come back together in ways we've never seen. But it's like a powder keg waiting to happen right now because there is this disconnect in value and there's a disconnect in how we relate to each other. And there's still a lot of healing to do. And I'm kind of fascinated by that because the beginning of my career, I was actually an interior designer. And I spent my early years designing aging in place systems. And so I'm inherently familiar with the healthcare system and what that looks like. And not in my lifetime will anyone I love go into one of those systems if I can help it, like never. But I understand it. And it was very sad to witness what was happening in those spaces. And it's like, it's just not necessary. But what is it? The seven fire prophecy of the Anishinaabe, where they're talking about exactly what we're experiencing right now over the 7 generations where everything devolves and we've lost the elder because the elder wasn't needed. We've relegated the elder to other. We've put them in the corner. Their wisdom isn't being actively sought out. They're forgetting. They don't know what they should be passing down.
Commoditized it, right?
commoditized it and we've turned it into a title and a role instead of a function. To what I was saying earlier, we have roles and titles, which look beautiful, but they're performative. And then we have function, which seems to be lost. I think we just don't understand the function of these archetypes that you speak about. And we really have to bring that back to the forefront and what that looks like so that we stop falling for the performance and actually act and function.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I love that. I love how our lives have been completely different. We've never met before. And yet so much of what we're doing, even though we might use different words and come from different verticals, it's very much the same. And that to me is like where we see the
humanness of it.
Yeah, I would even say it's like it's a paradigm shift, right? Where like it doesn't, because I'm sure a lot of listeners like, are saying like, oh, I'm translating their different two systems of words in my system and it's the same, right? And that's where we're finding like we're part of this rising tide of change. And so I just want to go back to part of which like pulled me into your world was this whole idea of you're collapse aware. We're aware that these systems that are going towards entropy that were never designed from sustainability, that probably rose out of sugar and alcohol culture that and promote greed and fear, right? I got to hold on to all my stuff. That those are just breaking down. And they're breaking down in a million ways, and we're all becoming aware of them. Some of us are building the new structures, right, that are hopefully more enthalpic, that are upcycling the wisdom of the generations of the past moving into the future, right, that we're able to then just like plug into the emergent.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, we all have, through our own lived experiences, we all have our own language for it, which is beautiful because it means we can reach the people and bridge that to the people who understand that. Like people in the legal and finance world understand what I'm talking about and speaking their language, which is so interesting. And it is like, and the fatigue is real. Like anyone who's gone through this journey, when you see everything breaking down around you, you have these like, oh no moments because it can feel like the sky is falling until it doesn't. I've never been so excited for what's coming.
Yeah.
People thought I was nuts at the beginning of 2025. I'm like, this is going to be the best year ever. I am so excited for what's coming this year.
Yeah.
Like the sky's not falling. It's getting brighter.
I mean, there's more people podcasting. There's more people with online businesses. There's so much creativity that's happening. Right. And it's just a question of the frequency you're plugged into.
If you listen to the collapse narrative, you are going to think the sky is falling, right? If you are resilient minded and you are forward thinking and you're adaptable and agile and you have the ability to take a minute, go inward, assess what's around you, cut the contracts that are no longer serving you. My God, the world is a beautiful place.
Amen to that. So I'm going to point everyone to your website again. This is Nicole Connor and the resiliencycode.substack.com. All right, you guys. Hello, listeners. So I have created for the wellness pros out there who listen to this show, the Wellness Pro Launchpad, and I'll get you in for free. Just go to wellnesspro.academy /launchpad, LAUNCHPAD, Launchpad, and then just fill out the form and we'll get you right into this school classroom in here. And in the Launchpad, it's really cool. Like you get to see yourself as the hero in the path of the Wellness Pro and then your client's transformation and A to B and your vibe and your brand, your investment story, and design the journey for your clients, patients, or students, and then how to price from results. So these lessons are super short. They're each about 10 minutes, and you'll have a reframe on how to launch and scale the next phase of your wellness career. So wellnesspro.academy /launchpad. And then and on the inside, if you really want to launch, you can, like your next phase of growth as a wellness pro, then you can talk to me. See you soon.